Hey friends! Welcome to the Drug Prevention Power Hour, where we empower leaders in youth drug prevention. After creating a student-led movement hosting epic drug-free events across the nation, your host, Jake White, dedicated himself to making the prevention field more fun, impactful, and relevant for today's youth. So if you're in education, counseling, public health, prevention, or just a caring adult looking for strategies to protect your kids, we hope you subscribe and learn from every show. Coming to you from Jake White and his team at Vive 18, enjoy this episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour.
Welcome back to another episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour. I'm your host, Jake White from Vive 18, and today we are hanging out with a new friend, Ryan Jensen. Now, Ryan is a Minnesota-based speaker and a formal medical examiner, death investigator. With 16 years of experience, he has performed over 2,000 autopsies and 800 death investigations. He saw firsthand the devastating impact of substance abuse and the opioid crisis on individuals, families, and communities. And Ryan asked if we could have a discussion on the show. I was so excited to say yes. Ryan, welcome to the Drug Prevention Power Hour.
Thanks, Jake, for having me. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for taking the time. You're doing so many great things, and I'm just glad I can hopefully contribute to you and other people out there that have the same passion as we do.
Absolutely. And that's the audience you're talking to today, is people that are ready to save lives and partner up with great organizations to do it. So just to get things started, Ryan, will you tell me a little bit about yourself? And then how did you get passionate about this kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I know we only have a short time here on the show, but I'll try to kind of give you a condensed version. So a little bit of background, I guess. This all kind of started back when in my childhood. You know, I unfortunately, as we all do, I grew up in a divorced family. My father, who I was pretty close to, he was, dealing with substance use disorders, and his drug of choice was opiates and that kind of thing, and ended up losing him back when I was 16 to an overdose. I was in 10th grade in high school. So that kind of set the stage as far as kind of my personal live story with drugs and drug prevention. I ended up deciding that I wanted to help people. I didn't know exactly how. I thought about social work and that kind of thing. I went to school actually for law enforcement, and then I transitioned actually to career in death investigations, where I did for 16 years. And that was kind of my intro as far as my path goes, to kind of get me passionate to, use my experience to help others, make positive choices.
Okay. Wow. I'm very sorry to hear about your dad. When growing up in your house, was it as a kid, it's always interesting to look back and think of the things that I noticed or didn't notice. Was it evident to you as a kid that this was a problem, very clear, or was it kind of hidden?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was definitely, I would say, a weekly problem. There was times where, my father would get into treatment, and then he'd maybe be, sober for 2 or 3 months. But for the most part, I kind of grew up codependent, where I basically kind of, I try to hide his drugs, and I try to, kind of play the parent, as growing up in that situation. So yeah, I had a lot of, kind of like a lot of people out there, you have to kind of grow up early and fast. And I had a lot of traumatic experiences, which I'm still working through. We all are, right? It's a life journey. But I do use those memories, good and bad, for inspiration, to do the work that I do. And ultimately, the goal is to help people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that led you into studying law enforcement and then becoming a death investigator and things like that. I'm very curious to hear what some of the things that you have seen as far as a death investigator, obviously this being the drug prevention show.
Sure.
Is this something that showed up a lot in your work, or kind of take us to that experience from
that's a great question. So yeah, as far as death investigations go, so I briefly was a police officer. After I kind of skipped that part earlier, and then I transitioned into actually doing autopsies, like you mentioned earlier. Basically, with the autopsy thing, the big thing is with drug abuse, or even just trying to figure out how somebody passed away, is to do toxicology. And the cool thing, not cool, but the interesting thing that I enjoyed about it was giving families answers and closure. If somebody's young in their 20s or 30s, We would do an autopsy. If there was nothing anatomically wrong with them, it wasn't a natural event like a heart attack, aneurysm, that stuff kind of happens to young people. We would do toxicology. And a lot of times families and stuff, not they're in denial or they just had no idea. It would be positive for drugs, or it'd be what they call mixed drug toxicity, accidental death for overdose is what it's classified as. And a lot of families just had a hard time, accepting that. So that was one thing about the job that I did, doing autopsies and death investigations. It's going out to the scenes. I'm just one small part of the process. You have law enforcement, the doctors, but just kind of being a guidance for family to give them answers, whether or not it's something that, was expected or not. They did find answers eventually. Now, part of the role that I enjoyed the most as a death investigator was helping them find answers.
Okay. And one of the questions that I think parents tend to ask this more, because I think as parents, their worst fear is that their child would end up taking something that would end their life. And right now we live in a world where there's fentanyl, and that of course is extremely deadly. And the one, like, you could take it once and pass away. Were you seeing things like that? Where were some of the things that you saw being responsible for these things? If like a parent were to come up to you and say like, hey, what do I need to look out for? What would your response be?
Yeah. So, a lot of the scenes I went out to, it's not your typical thing like you see on TV where, you're in a dark alley at midnight. A lot of these are affluent neighborhoods, with teenagers especially. I would go out to scenes and I would say the average age range is probably anywhere from like 12 to, all the way up to 30 is probably the most common. Usually, one or two things are kind of commonalities that I see at the scenes. Usually I'll go in someone's bedroom and you'll see a white powder. Obviously, like you said, it's usually fentanyl. I've even seen marijuana and even gummies nowadays have fentanyl in it. It's not as common, but fentanyl, as you know, is getting cut into everything to save costs, right? The dealers, people, they're selling the stuff on the streets. They want their supply to go faster, so they're pretty much mixing in anything they can get their hands on because they want repeat customers. And ultimately it comes down to money. So a lot of times, you've probably heard too, there's actually something called carfentanil out there, which is even worse than fentanyl, which is essentially an elephant tranquilizer. And I had a couple cases like that where some younger people were, they had the blue M20 pills that they were smashing up, and they were found $1 bill, and they were snorting them. And they had carfentanil in it. So as a first responder to last responder, when I went out to that scene specifically, that stuff is so potent it just takes a grain of sand. And actually I had to have an ambulance on standby, a whole kind of I call them moon suits, or kind of those astronaut looking suits for my own protection, because there's stuff out there that's even worse than fentanyl, and kids nowadays have access to it, which is scary.
Dang. Yeah, that is scary. And actually, I hadn't heard of that before you mentioning it.
Yeah, it's not as common as fentanyl, but it's out there. You get a bad batch of it. And I had two people actually at the same scene that both passed away from carfentanil, and they were right on top of each other. That's how quick it was.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
When, with your background and now doing the work that you do, supporting communities and even speaking, what's the message you're really passionate about bringing to the world? What are some of the things that you're excited to teach others?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jake. So, the biggest thing the message I try to bring to high school students and in prevention is, to be real with them. I usually, I don't try to use a scare tactic approach. I'm real with them. I do tell stories, obviously in more of a, I don't use the word dumbed down way, but less graphic way, because I know obviously that, to get your messages across to kids, they need to understand, the positive aspect of choices, different options. So my big message is when I go and teach at schools is I get a little bit of background about myself. I talk to them about, I start out by saying, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. These are stories that I've actually seen in real life. This isn't on TV. And I kind of give them every 5 or 10 minutes that I'm kind of talking to them about resiliency and positive choices and different things that they can do, besides going down the path of, as you call it, kind of a quick fix, right, to kind of solve their problems, which we all know, makes things worse. But I try to be interactive with them. As you know, with high school students, you have to be able to be engaging, and, otherwise they're just going to kind of fall asleep. And if you can't hold the room for an hour, as things can go south pretty fast. So I always kind of try to keep that in mind. Is I tell stories, I tell them exactly what I see at the scenes, the consequences I've seen, but also give them solutions and reasons why making positive choices not only is going to, help them from being a victim of opiates or drugs, but also it's going to help their career and ultimately their future, by starting young, by making those choices early.
Yeah. And that's so important when we bring prevention into the picture is the message isn't just don't do this, and students saying, well, what can I do? Or how can I deal with stress? Or how can I get the things that I want, feel the way I want, have friends and fit in, like all these questions. And as you've been around our website for a little bit now, and we're, doing some research, is that something that I think it's probably like the number one reason why we get booked or rebooked is because they said it wasn't a don't do this message. It was a, you can do better things. You can have a great life and relieve stress and build community, and then giving those skills. And I know from reading about you, that's part of your story too, is like resiliency and developing good skills. So what do you think are these skills that students need to continue making good choices?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is as far as the skills go is, students, a lot of, my experience myself as a teenager, even just kind of, as well as, you don't have to have everything figured out. One thing I try to tell them is, you can be doing all the right things in life and you're going to come across adversity. We all do, right? It doesn't matter what family you're from. Some families are, might have a little bit easier than others, but no matter what cards you're dealt per se, you have the opportunity to, how you're going to react, so, and those kind of obviously break it down to choices. I try telling them that, small choices, they add up obviously to routines, to habits, to lifestyle changes, kind of the cycle. So, I try to tell them that, a lot of your friends, a lot of your peers that you may or may not know, they're not out there using drugs, they're out there having fun, they're in sports, theater, whatever it is, there's other alternatives, and ultimately with hiding, running from your feelings, whether it's you're frustrated with school or your friends or your parents or home life, that you still can choose. You can't choose what happens to you, but you can choose saying no to drugs. You can choose doing positive things. Even if it's going outside, going for a walk. Growing up for me, my dad was using. I would go down and walk by the river just to get out of there, get my mind right. And it's not the easiest, as we all know, but teenagers and kids need to understand that there's other options out there, and even if you're in a tough family situation, you can overcome it. If I would have chose to go down my dad's path, I wouldn't have been able to get law enforcement. I wouldn't have been able to, do the things I'm doing, and I wouldn't be right here talking to you, to Jake right now. So, every choice he makes, it obviously influences your future, and that's really what I try to explain to them, that ultimately they can choose how they react to whatever situation.
Yeah, that's so important. And I'm like imagining, being a student in the audience and hearing your story. I'm also imagining you do share like how it personally affected you and your dad and things like that. I remember being in Los Angeles and I was speaking to a group of students, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but sometimes people expect you to stink, right? They're like, hey, the students aren't going to listen, or you're doing drug prevention. Oh, good luck. Yeah. These students are using drugs every day.
Boring, right? You're just another boring speaker, right? Yeah, no,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes. And before they see you, I mean, that's the standard. That's the standard is that, hey, drug prevention speakers or assembly speakers are boring. They're not relevant. The students aren't going to like it. They won't listen to you. So the bar is very, very low.
It is.
Which that's a shame, right? Like someone came in and did that to make the bar that low. But I remember being in LA and people were saying, hey, these kids, they're not going to resonate with you. Like, hey, don't feel bad if they're on their phones the whole time. And I'm listening to this thinking like, all right, I haven't even started. And you're not giving me the benefit of the doubt. You're not giving the students the benefit of the doubt. Like, I'm going to believe the best in these students, and they deserve a great show. Not one where I walk in all insecure and afraid they won't like it.
Right.
Now, it was a small group, maybe like 30 to 50 high school students, all have behavioral issues at school, getting in trouble. And that's probably why that person said that to me. But we had a blast, went through the program, talked back and forth about the content, about prevention and choices and what can we do instead. And at the end, they were all super excited. They're like, Jake, can we throw sober parties like you do? And get sponsors and all that stuff. So they were 100% in. But the best part, again, keep in mind what we were being told about the experience. And then at the end, this young girl comes up with her teacher and says, Jake, I didn't expect to like this because of what I've seen before, but you just gave me permission to not repeat and go in my mom's footsteps.
Wow.
She really struggles with addiction. And I realize today with you, I don't have to do that. And I imagine, Ryan, that's a big permission of hearing you speak, is that you have this choice when you see addiction in your family to think, well, that's just going to be my life. I'm going to go down that route and this will be my outcome. Or you have the choice to say, no, it stops here. Me, I'm going to end it for generationally for my family. Like, I'm going to go for something better. And that's why it got me excited about your story too, is the students are going to put themselves in your shoes and they're going to be resonating with that moment, especially the ones who have parents that are using at home, which unfortunately happens more than we would like.
Yeah, no, that's, and when you talk about sore partners too, I mean, that's like just, that was a genius and just such an awesome way to approach things differently, and I'm not knocking the DARE program of the 90s or kind of, that kind of thing, because I believe that was a lot of good too. But like you were saying, you have to have a fresh outlook. You need something different, if you, even when it comes to PowerPoint, right? You have an outline, but if you're not engaged and you're just reading to the kids, you're going to lose them in about 5 minutes. To add to your point, that's the reason that I do what I do, you do what you do, and a lot of people out there that are listening do is, if you can make a difference in one person's life, I don't care how far you travel, it was worth it. And ultimately you're not going to be there for them when they make those decisions, or everybody, but just to get the students to think, if I make this choice, maybe I'll remember what Jake said, maybe I'll remember what Ryan said that resonated with me, and and just letting them pause as or think through things versus having that immediate response that a lot of teenagers, and even us as adults do, right? It goes a long way. So yeah. And that's what inspires and motivates me is making the choices. I decide for myself, I have 3 young kids at home that I didn't want them to have to go through what I went through, and I use that as motivation. Was it a bumpy road? Sure. But obviously, it's not the road you're on, it's where you end up, and we're constantly through life going to be on that road. But if kids can just know that they don't have to go down that path, the hard path, is obviously, is hard to follow, like we all know, so just, I guess, for people out there listening and stuff, what you and I bring is just originality, empathy, excitement, and you can't replicate that, and students will spit you out if they don't see that you're genuine and you're not there for the right reasons. So that's important for anybody that's doing prevention work. You got to show that you want to.
Absolutely. I know that resonates, because some of the people listening have been thrown into a gym with a couple hundred students, and maybe they had a little training, maybe not.
Right. We all got to start somewhere, and you can feel your crowd out, if it's a crowd that's maybe more quiet or that kind of thing, you got to get it more interactive, and adjust. Mm-hmm. But overall, if you bring that energy, you're gonna get it back.
Yeah, absolutely. Dang, what's been doing this work so far? What's been one of the most rewarding experiences for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just to kind of add a little bit, as mental health piece is obviously a strong component, as we all know, for addictions and family cycles and stuff. When I grew up, I had a hard time in school, even going to college, even sometimes in different law enforcement situations. I had a hard time working crazy shifts. I figured I worked 24-hour shifts as a death investigator, so I figured I was tired all the time because, it's part of the job, right? Working crazy hours and being on call. But about 3 months ago, actually, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which I still am not an expert on, but essentially what I've gathered is, a reason that a lot of people that have it, it's basically, your prefrontal cortex, and I'm not a doctor by any means, but basically you're not getting that dopamine rush that a lot of people who I guess you call them neurotypical that don't have ADHD, they have to get those from other sources. So what I've learned myself, and which I also teach to students and stuff, is, you can use it as a superpower. So for students out there listening and stuff, you can be successful. I wasn't good in high school. I didn't get good grades, but with ADHD, I use a superpower now where I'm able to basically hyper-focus and for something that I'm interested in, which is prevention, was forensics for a lot of years. I was able to overcompensate ADHD, by focusing on things. And in a lot of kids that kind of have that, or they feel left out, or they might not feel like they fit in class, maybe they don't fit in with their peers. I just want them to know out there that, that you can, you turn that into a superpower and be successful in life. You might be labeled, you might, especially with medications and stuff too. I know some kids are like, he's on Adderall or medications or that kind of thing. But you know what? That doesn't define who we are as a person. So I just want people to know that they can be resilient, and they can with mental health issues, they can still make an impact in people's life. So I just want to get that little blurred on there as far as a little bit of my background with ADHD.
Yeah, that is important. I even had one guest on the show. His name was Jeff. He says he just calls it AD. He doesn't even use the last D. It's not a disorder,
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's really cool that he said it that way.
Yeah, you're not labeling. It's basically not labeling yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's Have you gotten requests because your story seems to focus, it's got prevention and mental health. Have you seen that there's more interest in one or the other from the schools that are bringing you out?
Yeah, I mostly focus or target on the drug prevention aspect, but during my, when I'm talking to classes and when I book talking to schools, I do mention my mental health piece. I've had kids come up to me after class and say, hey, I have ADHD and I want to do just what you're doing, and now I know I can do it. So just that inspiring piece, even if there's one or two kids in the class, and a lot of first responders and a lot of people in our profession too, we have the emergency response, whatever, a lot of them have ADHD because they're drawn to that, to that action, and one of the reasons that I think, it resonates well with schools and stuff is a lot of teachers, a lot of, kids have it that aren't diagnosed, and they feel different. They're like, you know what? I'm just like Ryan, I can do this. And it just, from an inspiring standpoint, it just, it really resonates well for them. And it's been a good success as far as booking things to add that element to my talks.
Yeah. And it's all correlated. So it's very, very much on topic.
Yep.
I want to throw in, I don't know if you saw this on our site, but it's so correlated. We actually have a partnership with a company called Brighton, and it's a mental health and wellness app that when we're done speaking, if the school wants to have a support system that stays there and lives beyond the message, like we have our, peer-led clubs and our toolkit and that kind of stuff, which is helpful. But like school counselors are really overworked these days, and they have caseloads are huge. And I've heard from them multiple times, like, hey, we had this speaker come. It was great. Students are asking for help, which is amazing, but I don't have the resources to follow up with everybody. So they do their intake and they find out about the students, what they need. And then the follow-up is this app it's like a journaling app that allows them to, keep track of their mood, how they're doing, reflect.
Wow, that's awesome.
The amazing thing is that the actual like anxiety and depression symptoms in the case study have gone down in some communities by up to 50%.
Wow.
Just by using the app regularly. So they integrate it into their homeroom schedule or SEL time. That's or whatever
amazing.
It is.
What a great resource. That is
right. So I had to do a shameless plug there. If you haven't seen it on our website, or check out Brighton, it's BRIGHTN. It's an app that they could use on their laptop or phone. And it comes back to this, like people asking, hey, like, is there any competition in prevention? And the answer is no. There's absolutely none. You should be using all these resources. And if you brought Vive 18 to speak before, you probably should be looking at other speakers as well, like Ryan, because we're not going to reach every student with the same exact strategy. There are all different types of partners, and there's coalitions and different services that we're using. And that's how we save lives. Because we can't necessarily compete with the billions of dollars that companies have that are trying to sell this stuff. But if we work together, we can do our job and we can protect and save more lives for sure.
It takes a village, man. It really does. No, that's great. And I appreciate that. And like I said, everybody brings just such a unique aspect to different aspects and stuff. And the main thing is we're all human. We all want to help each other. We're all compassionate. At the end of the day, it's all about prevention. And like I said, and as you've been doing this for a long time, if you can make a difference in one person's life, it was worth it, and if you get enough people the word gets out there, you keep growing. 518, I mean, you're already making an impact. We can just keep on fighting this opiate epidemic, and make it where it's not, it's not mainstream anymore. That's all our goal is just to, get rid of fentanyl. Let's keep at it, man.
Yeah. Thank you. You too, Ryan. We're getting close to time, Ryan. Please tell people how they can learn more about you and check out your offers, your speaking reel, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So yeah, if you guys want to check out my speaking website and book me or find more information, you can go to ryanjensenspeaks.com. I do offer online courses as well. You just got to shoot me an email. If you need anything kind of tailored, whether it's to, counseling, students, different kind of audiences, I can definitely do that for you. But yeah, I appreciate the time today. I'd love an opportunity to speak to these schools that are interested.
That's great. For everyone listening, this has been another episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour. We will see you next Monday.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Drug Prevention Power Hour podcast. If you love the show, make sure to leave a review and share what you've learned. And if you need help reducing substance use among youth by educating and engaging students in prevention, visit vive18.com for more information, tools, and resources.